Hey everybody, welcome to another managerial accounting video. Today we're going to be talking about product cost, and it's one of those things that we spend a lot of time in managerial accounting doing, is trying to come up with a cost for the product that we're producing, whether it be a automobile or maybe if we're a service company, a tax return or a lawyer providing legal representation on a case. So it's a really important concept of product cost, simply because if we don't know what our product is costing us to make or deliver, how can we know what to charge a person for to make sure that we're covering the cost that we're incurring? We very well may run the risk of losing money if we're not charging enough to cover our product cost, okay? So there are three components that make up our product cost. Whether we're talking about a manufacturing company, whether we're talking about a service firm, three things are going to go into making up our product cost. There's direct material, direct labor, and overhead. So it'd be very beneficial to take a minute and talk about what we have going on here with those three components of product cost. First of all, let's just use the example of an automobile manufacturing company, maybe Ford. We'll take Ford as an example. And we'll look at that as we go through the three components here. Starting with direct material. Direct material is any material that we can readily identify that can be conveniently and economically traced to our end product. Now, what I mean by that, a lot of things go into an automobile, but they may not be easily traced to that automobile in a way that would make sense to do it. It would cost us more money to trace it to it than it would benefit us to know that it went into. So here's an example. If we think about an automobile, obviously we'll have things like steel going into that automobile. There'll be an engine going into it, and a battery. Items like that are considered direct material because it's very easy to trace those to the automobile. Every automobile requires one battery, and it's probably a pretty substantial expense, $50, $75, whatever it might be. Every automobile requires one engine, so it's pretty easy to trace that to the automobile. It's a big cost, and it's easy to trace it from raw material into the automobile. However, think about glue. Every automobile is going to require some amount of glue to kind of maybe hold the dashboard together, hold the felt on the interior onto the door, okay? So that's probably something that might go into the automobile, but we're not going to consider that to be a direct material, simply because it's such a small amount and such an inconsequential dollar amount that it would be a waste of our time, and it would cost us more to trace it to the individual cars than it would be to just kind of throw it into indirect material and overhead. So direct material is going to be anything that we can easily and conveniently trace to the final product, okay? There'll be some things that go into the product that we won't consider direct just because the amounts are so inconsequential. It would cost us more to trace it to the product than to just forget about it, okay? So down here under overhead, I'm going to put glue. That's an indirect material, not a direct material. It goes into the car, but it's not going to be considered direct. Direct labor is the same idea, only we're looking at it from the labor side of things. So any kind of labor that directly goes into manufacturing that product, for instance, maybe the people on the assembly line, that's going to be direct labor. We can trace their labor directly to the completion of that product. They are adding value on the line as they put that product together. Now, there are going to be other people in that factory that are also working. We may have janitorial staff. We may have a forklift driver. Their labor is going to be indirect to the product. It's going to be very hard to trace their contributions to that automobile, okay? So direct labor are people that are directly involved with putting that car together, and we can easily and economically trace their labor to the product. So I'm just going to say factory assembly personnel. Their regular wages, regular benefits and things like that, and the payroll taxes that go along with them, that's going to go into direct labor, okay? So that leaves us with overhead. Everything that is not considered direct material, not considered direct labor, is going to go into overhead. So all of our indirect labor and all of our indirect material is going to go into overhead. All right? So to give you some examples of things that might be in overhead, we already talked about glue. We talked about the wages of the forklift driver and the janitor. Some other examples might be maybe utilities. We got to pay to keep the lights on. It's kind of hard to trace our light bill to any one given product, especially if we got a factory of 4 or 5 different product lines going on. So utilities would be an example of overhead. Our depreciation expense would go in overhead. Okay. Any selling and administrative expenses we have, maybe we have a sales force out there, and those salaries may get applied to overhead. Maybe we pay our workers overtime, and it kind of happens at random times throughout the manufacturing process. Overtime pay would go into overhead also, with one exception, unless we have a customer who has like a rush job and they do a special order, and then we can apply that overhead directly to the product we're selling that customer. That's kind of an exception there. But for the most part, overtime pay would be part of overhead as well. So we have direct material, direct labor, and overhead. And if we're looking at the kind of the whole picture here, direct material and direct labor, very easy to trace that directly to the product. Okay, there's no problem tracing direct material and direct labor to the product. Overhead, on the other hand, we can't really trace it all the time directly to the product, so we have to allocate it. Okay, we just maybe come up with a predetermined overhead rate and just apply it to all the products. And that's kind of what the class is as we go forward. A lot of it is trying to figure out how we allocate overhead in general and how we come up with a total product cost to assign to our product. So what you need to know going away from this, direct material, direct labor, you need to have an idea of what those are, and you need to know about a little bit about overhead. And really overhead is just everything that doesn't fall in direct material and direct labor. So we'll be talking about these a lot as we go forward. Make sure you got a good handle on those, and if you have any questions, let me know.